She said yes to a disabled millionaire, but the vows exposed a hidden truth. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us get back to our main character. Rain streaked across the glass walls of the Manhattan skyline as Evelyn Hart waited inside a sterile conference room. The air smelled faintly of coffee and money. She clutched her worn purse against her chest, her heartbeat echoing louder than the ticking clock on the wall. When the door finally opened, Alexander Pierce rolled in, his wheelchair gliding across the marble floor without a sound. He looked calm, distant, and frighteningly composed, the kind of man who could buy a city block with a single phone call. "Miss Hart," he said, his voice deep but gentle. "Thank you for coming." Evelyn stood quickly, nearly tripping on the corner of the rug. "Yes, sir, of course." He studied her quietly for a moment before sliding a thin folder across the table. "I will be direct," he said. "I need a wife." Her breath caught. "Excuse me? This is not a proposal of love," he continued. "It is an agreement, a marriage in name only." Evelyn blinked, unsure if she had misheard him. "A marriage? For what reason?" Alexander's gaze never wavered. "Public image. The board insists that I stabilize the company's reputation after the accident. Investors lose faith when they see weakness." He gestured to his wheelchair with a flicker of dry irony. "And they see this as weakness." She hesitated, her throat tightening. "So, you need a bride for appearances." "Exactly," he nodded once. "You will attend events, dinners, a few press conferences. In return, your debts will be cleared, and your mother's medical expenses will be paid in full." Her pulse hammered in her ears. The folder in front of her might as well have been glowing. "You have read about my situation?" "I know everything," he replied calmly. "You are behind on rent. Your mother is at Street Francis Hospital awaiting surgery. You work 2 jobs and still cannot keep up." Her fingers trembled as she opened the folder. Inside was a formal contract, each clause printed in immaculate precision. "No real feelings," she read aloud. "No physical intimacy. Strict confidentiality. It's one of the great balances." Her voice faltered when she reached the last line. "Termination after 1 year." Alexander folded his hands. "You will have your freedom by then, and security until that day comes." Evelyn stared at the papers, then at him. He was a stranger, a powerful, broken stranger, who offered her everything she could not give herself. "This is insane," she whispered. He gave a faint, humorless smile. "Sometimes survival requires accepting the unthinkable." For a long moment, neither spoke. The hum of the city filled the silence. She thought about the hospital bills stacked on her counter, the eviction notice taped to her door, and her mother's fragile voice on the phone last night. Finally, Evelyn looked up. "What happens if I say yes?" Alexander leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes steady. "Then, Miss Hart, you will no longer be a waitress struggling to survive. You will be Mrs. Pierce, my wife, on paper." Her heart pounded so hard it hurt. "And if I say no?" He tilted his head. "Then I will find someone else." Evelyn swallowed hard, the weight of her life pressing on her chest. She reached for the pen lying on the table. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Where do I sign?" Alexander watched her name appear in clean, hesitant strokes. When she finished, he added his own signature beneath hers with a single fluid motion. "Congratulations, Mrs. Pierce," he said softly. "From this moment, our arrangement begins." Outside, thunder rolled over the city. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the ink still drying on the page, realizing that she had just traded her freedom for a contract and that her new husband was a man the world pitied, but no one truly knew. What she did not yet understand was that this agreement, built on cold logic and necessity, would soon uncover a truth powerful enough to change both of their lives forever. The next morning, New York felt heavier than usual. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the streets like a secret no one wanted to speak. Evelyn woke before sunrise, the contract from the night before still lying on her kitchen table. Her name, written in dark ink, stared back at her like a confession she could not undo. She sat in silence for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant horns outside her apartment window. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her head, soft, tired, and hopeful. "Do not worry about me, sweetheart. Just keep going." Evelyn brushed away a tear and stood. She dressed carefully, choosing the only formal outfit she owned, a cream blouse and a skirt that had faded slightly from too many washes. When she stepped out into the hallway, the envelope with Alexander Pierce's logo felt heavier than the purse in her hand. By 10 o'clock, she was standing in the marble lobby of Pierce Holdings, surrounded by people who looked like they had never known fear or debt. Their shoes clicked sharply on the polished floor. Their voices carried the confident rhythm of people who belonged. Evelyn did not. "Good morning," the receptionist said politely, her smile professional. "Do you have an appointment?" "Yes," Evelyn replied quietly. "With Mr. Pierce." "Top floor, executive office," the woman said, her tones softening slightly when she noticed Evelyn's trembling hands. "Good luck." The elevator doors closed, sealing Evelyn inside with her reflection. She hardly recognized the woman in the mirror. Her eyes looked older than they had yesterday. When the doors opened again, a tall assistant waited for her in a navy skirt and heels that echoed down the hall. "Mr. Pierce is expecting you," the assistant said, leading her to a set of glass doors. Inside, Alexander sat behind a sleek desk overlooking the city. The morning light caught the steel rims of his wheelchair. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable. "You are early," he said. "I did not sleep much," she admitted. "Understandable." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Have you read the contract again?" Evelyn nodded. "Every word." "Good. Then there is one last formality." He opened a drawer and placed a velvet box on the desk. Inside rested 2 simple gold rings. "For appearances," he explained. "Our ceremony will be private and brief. No guests, no press. There. It is Velabal collar." She stared at the rings, her stomach twisting. "When?" "Today," he said. "The judge will meet us at City Hall in 1 hour." Her voice trembled. "You move fast." "I do not like wasting time," he replied, "and I keep my promises. Your mother's hospital account will be cleared by this afternoon." The words hit her harder than she expected. Gratitude and shame collided in her chest. She managed a quiet "thank you" before he turned his chair toward the window, signaling that their conversation was over. 1 hour later, Evelyn stood beside Alexander in a quiet courthouse. The clerk spoke in a flat tone as she read the vows. The only sound was the rain tapping against the windows. "Do you, Alexander Pierce, take this woman, Evelyn Hart, to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," he said calmly. "And do you, Evelyn Hart, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" In rever. Her throat felt tight, but she forced the words out. "I do." The clerk handed them the certificate to sign. Alexander's signature was steady. Hers shook slightly. When the final line was filled, the clerk smiled faintly. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Pierce." The ceremony ended in less than 10 minutes. No flowers, no music, no witnesses. Only 2 signatures, and a promise neither fully understood. Outside, a black sedan waited at the curb. The driver held an umbrella as Alexander guided his wheelchair toward the car. Evelyn followed silently, clutching her small handbag like a shield. The ride to his mansion was long and quiet. Raindrops slid down the tinted windows, blurring the city lights into silver streaks. Alexander scrolled through his phone, unreadable as ever. Evelyn's reflection stared back at her, pale and uncertain. When they arrived, she stepped out onto a gravel driveway that glimmered with rain. Before her stood the Pierce estate columns of white stone, wide glass windows, and gardens trimmed so perfectly they looked unreal. "Welcome home," Alexander said, his voice calm but distant. The housekeeper opened the doors, and Evelyn followed him inside. The air smelled of jasmine and polished wood. Portraits of serious-looking men lined the walls, their gazes cold and eternal. "This will be your room," Alexander said, stopping at a doorway near the staircase. "Mine is at the end of the hall. We will maintain separate quarters. You will join me for public appearances and dinners when required. Otherwise, you may occupy yourself as you wish." Evelyn nodded. "Understood." He looked at her for a moment longer, then added, "Dinner is at 7. When he left, the silence filled the space around her. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint reflection of the rain on the window. She twisted the plain gold ring on her finger, trying to feel something security, relief, even peace. But all she felt was the echo of her own heartbeat. Somewhere in the house, the sound of wheels moved softly across the floor. For the first time, she realized she had no idea who Alexander Pierce really was or what secrets lay behind those calm, distant eyes. Days turned into a quiet routine inside the Pierce mansion. The world outside seemed far away, replaced by the hum of distant voices, the clinking of dishes from the kitchen, and the echo of Alexander's wheelchair moving through the marble halls. Evelyn kept mostly to herself. Each morning she woke early, made her bed, and tried to find small tasks that made her feel useful, watering the indoor plants, organizing her closet, or helping the housekeeper tidy the library. She was not required to do anything, but sitting still made her feel trapped. At dinner, Alexander always appeared precisely at 7. They ate at opposite ends of a long dining table that could have seated 20 people. The meals were exquisite, the silence heavier than the chandeliers above them. "How was your day?" she asked once, breaking the stillness. He looked up briefly. "Productive." "That is good," she said softly. He gave a polite nod and returned to his meal. Evelyn tried again the next night, asking about the company, about his recovery, about anything that might open a window into who he really was. But his answers remained short, measured, almost rehearsed. Yet there were moments fleeting and quiet when she saw something different. When the pain in his hands made him pause mid-sentence, or when his eyes drifted toward the piano in the corner of the room, but never touched the keys. One evening after dinner, she gathered enough courage to ask, "Do you play?" He followed her gaze to the piano. "I used to," he said. "What stopped you?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "The accident." She hesitated. "Would you like me to play for you sometime?" He studied her for a long moment before answering. "If you wish." That weekend, while he worked in his study, Evelyn sat at the piano. Her fingers brushed against the ivory keys, hesitant at first, then surer as a simple melody filled the room. It was a song her mother used to hum while cleaning, soft and hopeful. She did not realize Alexander had stopped his chair in the doorway until the final note faded. "You play beautifully," he said quietly. Evelyn startled slightly. "I am sorry. I did not mean to interrupt your work." "You did not." His tone softened, and for the first time, he smiled just barely, but it was real. "It has been a long time since this house has heard music." Something in that smile stayed with her long after he left the room. In the days that followed, the air between them shifted. Their conversations became longer, their silences more comfortable. Sometimes he joined her in the garden, watching from the terrace as she pruned the roses. Other times she read aloud from one of his books while he listened, his expression thoughtful. One rainy afternoon, while serving tea, Evelyn noticed a framed photograph on his desk. Alexander standing beside a younger woman with dark hair and bright eyes. The woman's hand rested on his shoulder. The photo was old, but the affection in their smiles was unmistakable. "She was my fiancée," he said suddenly, his voice calm but distant. "She left after the accident." Evelyn froze, unsure what to say. "She said she could not watch me live like this," he continued, his gaze fixed on the window. "I suppose I could not blame her." Evelyn's chest tightened. "I am sorry," she whispered. He turned toward her, his eyes steady but sad. "Do not be. People reveal who they are when life stops being convenient." That night, as she lay awake, Evelyn could not stop thinking about his words. Beneath his calm surface, Alexander Pierce was not just a powerful man in a wheelchair. He was someone quietly grieving the life he had lost. And though she told herself it was just a contract, she could not ignore the truth forming slowly in her heart. She was beginning to care for him, more than she ever intended to. A month later, Evelyn's life no longer felt like borrowed time. The mansion that had once seemed too large and cold now carried faint traces of warmth. Fresh flowers stood in the hallway every morning. The kitchen staff greeted her by name. Even Alexander, though still distant, had begun to ask about her day. Their relationship remained professional in public, but behind closed doors, something was quietly changing. One evening, he invited her to join him for dinner in the smaller dining room, an intimate space lined with books and dim golden light. "I thought we could try something less formal tonight," he said. "The main dining hall feels like a board meeting." Evelyn smiled softly. "That sounds nice." Over the meal, the conversation flowed more easily than ever before. Alexander spoke about his travels before the accident, about the company he had built from nothing, and the pressure that came with power. Evelyn listened, fascinated. His words were measured, but his eyes revealed something vulnerable, a glimpse of the man behind the reputation. "I used to believe control was everything," he said. "Then I lost control of my own body. That kind of truth humbles you." Evelyn met his gaze. "Maybe that is when we learn who we really are." He looked at her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Perhaps you are right." After dinner, he asked her to walk with him through the garden. The night air was cool, filled with the faint scent of lavender. He moved his chair slowly along the gravel path, and she walked beside him, her steps matching his pace. "You seem different lately," he said quietly. "How so?" "Less afraid." She smiled faintly. "Maybe because you stopped being quite so terrifying." He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "I will take that as progress." As they passed the fountain, Evelyn noticed him glance at the water's reflection. His expression changed darker, more guarded. "There will be a charity gala next week," he said. "The press will be there. It will be our first public appearance together as husband and wife." Her stomach tightened. "Do you think I am ready for that?" "You will be," he said. "There is a stylist coming tomorrow to help you choose a gown. We will make sure everything looks convincing." The word stung more than she expected. Convincing. It was a reminder of what this marriage really was. That night, she stood before the mirror in her room, staring at the reflection of her wedding ring. Somewhere along the line, she had stopped seeing it as a symbol of debt or obligation. Now it felt like something heavier, something real. The following days were a blur of fittings, rehearsals, and briefings. Alexander's assistant taught her how to pose for photographers, how to answer polite questions without giving anything away. Evelyn learned how to smile without trembling. When the night of the gala arrived, she stepped out of the car in a silver gown that shimmered under the flash of cameras. Alexander sat beside her, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, the silver rims of his wheelchair gleaming. Reporters shouted their names as they entered the ballroom. Inside, music floated through the air, and chandeliers sparkled above the crowd. Evelyn's heart pounded as she held Alexander's arm for the first time in public. To everyone watching, they looked like the perfect couple, poised, graceful, untouchable. But beneath the surface, her hands trembled. Halfway through the evening, a man approached, tall, confident, and familiar. Evelyn recognized him from a photo on Alexander's desk. It was his former business partner, Thomas Hale. "Alexander," Thomas said with a sharp smile, "I see you have found yourself a new partner in more ways than one." Alexander's expression did not change. "Good evening, Thomas." Thomas's gaze drifted toward Evelyn. "She is lovely. I just hope she knows what she has gotten herself into." Evelyn felt the insult like a slap, but before she could respond, Alexander spoke, his voice calm and cold. "She knows exactly who she married." For a moment, silence surrounded them. Then Thomas forced a laugh and walked away. Evelyn looked at Alexander, her chest tight. He met her eyes briefly and gave a small, almost invisible nod, his way of saying that she had nothing to fear. And for the first time, she realized something undeniable. The man the world saw as broken was the only person in that room strong enough to protect her. The gala marked a turning point that neither of them expected. The morning after, newspapers splashed their photo across the society pages. Alexander Pierce and his stunning wife steal the spotlight. Evelyn stared at the headlines in disbelief. For the first time, the world saw her not as a struggling waitress, but as Mrs. Pierce, the mysterious woman who stood beside one of New York's most powerful men. At breakfast, Alexander sat across from her, scrolling through his phone. "The coverage is better than I anticipated," he said. "You handled yourself well last night." Evelyn tried to hide her smile. "Thank you. I was terrified." "I noticed," he replied, a faint trace of amusement in his tone. "But you did not let it show." "They want to do Action 7. She stirred her coffee. "I just wanted to make sure I did not embarrass you." He looked up, his gaze steady. "You could never embarrass me." The words caught her off guard, sending warmth through her chest. For a moment, the silence between them felt almost comfortable, like the pause between heartbeats. In the days that followed, Alexander's attitude toward her began to shift. He invited her to sit in on company dinners, to attend meetings as a silent observer, even to accompany him to the rehabilitation center for his physical therapy. Evelyn watched as he endured each session with quiet determination, refusing to show pain even when sweat beaded on his forehead. One afternoon, as she waited near the parallel bars, He stumbled slightly. Evelyn rushed forward instinctively, her hands on his arms to steady him. "I am fine," he said quickly, but his voice was unsteady. She looked up at him, her heart pounding. "You do not have to be." For a long moment, they stayed like that, her hands still holding him, his breath uneven. Then he stepped back, breaking the silence. "Thank you," he said softly. Later that evening, Evelyn sat by the window of her room, replaying the moment in her mind. Something about the way he had looked at her unguarded human lingered. She realized she had stopped seeing him as a man trapped by circumstance. He was simply a man flawed, proud, and deeply alive. A week later, they were invited to a family dinner at the home of Alexander's older sister, Margaret. The evening began politely enough, but as the conversation shifted, Evelyn sensed tension beneath the surface. "So, Evelyn," Margaret said, her tone sweet but edged, "how are you adjusting to your new life? It must be quite a change for you." Evelyn smiled politely. "It is, but I am learning." Margaret sipped her wine. "I imagine it must be difficult to manage the expectations that come with our name." Alexander's jaw tightened. "Margaret, what?" she said innocently. "I am simply curious. After all, people have been talking about how quickly the two of you married." Evelyn felt her stomach knot, but before she could respond, Alexander spoke. His voice was calm but sharp. "You should be careful what you repeat, Margaret. My wife deserves respect." The table fell silent. Even Margaret looked surprised. Evelyn lowered her gaze, her pulse racing. When the dinner ended and they returned to the car, she whispered, "You did not have to defend me like that." "Yes, I did," he said quietly, "because it was the truth." For a long while, they rode in silence, the city lights flickering across their faces. Evelyn turned her wedding ring slowly between her fingers. The contract had begun as a transaction, but something real was taking root between them, something fragile and dangerous. Later that night, as she walked past his study, she heard the faint sound of music. Alexander was at the piano, his fingers moving carefully across the keys. The melody was soft and uneven, but it carried a kind of ache she could feel in her chest. He looked up when she entered. "I am out of practice," he said quietly. "It sounds beautiful," she replied. He smiled faintly. "It feels different when someone is listening." She moved closer, standing beside him. For the first time, he played without hesitation. The music filled the room, rising and falling like the rhythm of two hearts learning to move together. And in that moment, Evelyn understood what she could no longer deny. What had started as a contract was slowly becoming something neither of them could control. The weeks after the family dinner blurred into a rhythm that felt almost normal. Evelyn and Alexander began to move like two people who had known each other longer than a contract could explain. Their mornings started with quiet coffee on the terrace. Their evenings ended with music, conversation, or simply the comfort of shared silence. But beneath the surface, the truth of their arrangement still lingered. 1 year, one signature, one expiration date. Evelyn tried not to think about it, but the thought hovered at the edges of every smile. One afternoon, while Alexander was in a meeting downtown, Evelyn decided to visit St. Francis Hospital to check on her mother. The nurses greeted her warmly, surprised at how much her life seemed to have changed. After the visit, she stopped by a nearby cafe for a coffee before heading home. She was waiting for her drink when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Mrs. Pierce," the man said smoothly, "I did not expect to see you here." She turned and saw Thomas Hale, Alexander's former partner. His smile was polite, but his eyes gleamed with something sharper. "Mr. Hale," she said cautiously, "good afternoon." He gestured to the empty chair beside her. "May I?" Evelyn hesitated but nodded out of politeness. Thomas sat, leaning back with the casual confidence of someone used to controlling every room he entered. "I have to say," he began, "you have adapted quite well to your new life. When I first heard about the marriage, I thought it was a joke." Evelyn frowned. "Why would you think that?" He smirked. "Because everyone knows Alexander cannot possibly love again. Not after what happened. So when he suddenly appeared with a wife, it raised questions." Her stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that make shareholders nervous," Thomas said, lowering his voice. "And if they knew this marriage was nothing more than a business arrangement, imagine how fast his reputation would collapse." Evelyn froze. "You do not know what you are talking about." "Oh, I think I do," he said softly. "People talk. Contracts have witnesses. And you sweet, innocent Evelyn might not realize how much power you have in this situation. She stood, anger rising in her chest. If you think I will help you hurt him, you are wrong. Thomas smiled coldly. You already have. You just do not know it yet. She left without another word, her hands shaking. By the time she reached the mansion, her mind was spinning. What did he mean? What could he possibly know? That evening, Alexander returned home earlier than expected. He looked tired, distracted. Evelyn tried to act normal, but he noticed immediately. What happened? He asked. Nothing, she said quickly. Just an unpleasant encounter. With whom? Thomas Hale, she admitted. He found me at a cafe. He said things about us about the contract. Alexander's expression hardened. What exactly did he say? That he knows everything. That he plans to use it against you. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. Then he wheeled himself to the window, his voice low. I should have expected this. Thomas has been looking for leverage ever since he lost his position on the board. Evelyn stepped closer. Can he really do anything? Incest. If he proves our marriage is not real? Yes, Alexander said quietly. It could destroy everything I have rebuilt. The weight of his words settled over them like fog. Evelyn felt her throat tighten. Then, what should we do? He turned toward her slowly. We make it real. She blinked. What do you mean? We show the world what they want to see, he said. We attend every event together. We let them believe in us because if we do not, they will turn that doubt into a weapon. Evelyn hesitated. And if that means crossing the line between fake and real? He met her gaze. Then so be it. The next week became a whirlwind of appearances. They smiled for cameras, exchanged subtle glances in front of reporters, and let the world write its own story about their marriage. What began as strategy slowly blurred into something neither of them could control. One night, after a long charity dinner, Alexander stopped his wheelchair beside the grand staircase. The house was quiet, the only light coming from the chandelier above. Evelyn stood across from him, exhausted but glowing from the evening. You did well tonight, he said softly. So did you, she replied. You even smiled for the cameras. He laughed lightly. Do not tell anyone. It might ruin my reputation. She smiled, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. The air between them shifted, no longer filled with pretense or duty, but something real and fragile. Without thinking, Evelyn stepped closer. Her hand brushed his cheek, and he did not pull away. Alexander, she whispered, are we still pretending? He looked up at her, his voice barely a breath. I do not know anymore. The silence that followed said everything words could not. For the first time, there was no contract, no strategy, only two people standing on the edge of something real, terrified to fall but unable to turn back. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of rain against the glass, the same sound that had filled the room the night they met. Only this time, it no longer sounded cold. It sounded like a beginning. The morning after the gala circuit ended, Evelyn woke to the sound of her phone vibrating on the nightstand. She reached for it sleepily, expecting another reminder from the charity committee. Instead, her screen displayed a headline that made her blood run cold. Pierce marriage scandal. Contract leaked, sources claim deal behind the vows. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. Every major news outlet had the same story. The article quoted an anonymous source, someone who had supposedly seen the agreement itself. The text claimed Alexander's marriage was a staged arrangement, designed to gain sympathy and control over the company's image. Downstairs, Alexander was already in his study, his phone pressed to his ear. His tone was calm, but the tension in his shoulders told a different story. No comment, he said sharply. Do not release any statements until I say so. He hung up and turned to Evelyn. You saw it? He asked. She nodded, her voice shaking. They know about the contract. His jaw tightened. Thomas Hale, he said. It has to be him. What are we going to do? We handle it like we handle everything else, he said. We stay calm. We deny it. But before he could say more, the front gates filled with flashing lights. Reporters shouted questions, their voices overlapping into chaos. Mr. Pierce, did you pay your wife to marry you? Mrs. Pierce, are you in love with your husband or his fortune? Evelyn froze by the window. Alexander's face turned pale. They will not leave until they have blood, he said quietly. That afternoon, the board demanded an emergency meeting. Alexander insisted on going despite the chaos. Evelyn offered to come, but he refused. "If they see you there, they will think I am hiding behind you," he said. "This is my fight." Hours passed before he returned. When he did, his expression was unreadable. "They suspended me," he said simply. "Pending investigation." Evelyn's breath caught. "They cannot do that." "They can," he said. And they just did. She felt helpless as he wheeled himself toward the fireplace, staring at the flames. "I worked 20 years for that company," he said quietly. "And now, it could all disappear because of a lie." Evelyn stepped closer, her heart breaking. "Then let me fix it." "How?" "By telling the truth," she said. "If they want to know who we are, let them see it." He turned toward her. "You think they will believe you? They already made up their minds. Then let me change them." Before he could stop her, Evelyn walked to the window, where cameras still waited outside. She opened the door and stepped into the rain. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Her hair clung to her face, her dress soaked within seconds, but she stood her ground. "My name is Evelyn Pierce," she said, her voice firm. "And yes, this marriage began as an agreement. I was desperate. My mother was dying. Alexander offered help, and I accepted. But what none of you understand is what happened after that." The crowd fell silent. "He gave me more than security," she continued. "He gave me dignity. He treated me with respect when no one else did. And if you think that kind of kindness can be bought, then you have never been loved by a man like him." Her voice cracked on the last words, but she did not look away from the cameras. Inside, Alexander watched from the window, his eyes glistening. For the first time since the scandal broke, he felt something stronger than fear, pride. When she finally came back inside, soaked and shaking, he whispered, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said softly, "because it was the truth." For a long moment he just looked at her, unable to speak. Then he reached for her hand, his voice quiet and certain. "Evelyn, whatever happens next, I am done pretending." And in that moment, as the rain poured outside and the cameras kept flashing, their story was no longer fake. It was real, raw, and impossible to hide. The next morning, the storm outside had quieted, but the world was still watching. News channels replayed clips of Evelyn's speech, calling her words the confession that broke the silence. Some commentators mocked her, others called her brave. But what no one could deny was that her honesty had changed the story. Alexander's publicist arrived at the mansion with a tablet full of headlines. "Public opinion is shifting," she said. "Half the media now calls your marriage genuine. They are starting to see you as victims of corporate manipulation." Alexander barely reacted. He sat by the window, his expression calm but exhausted. "I never wanted to be a headline," he said. Evelyn sat beside him. "Then stop fighting to control the story. Just live it." He turned to her, his eyes softening. "You really believe we can survive this?" "I do," she said simply. Later that day, the board requested Alexander to attend one final hearing. He refused to go alone. "If they question my integrity, they should hear it from both of us." The meeting was held in a tall glass building overlooking the city. Evelyn stood beside Alexander as the board members whispered among themselves. The chairman cleared his throat. "Mr. Pierce, we have verified that the leaked contract was authentic. However, Mrs. Pierce's public statement has changed the narrative. Do you have anything to add?" Alexander looked around the table, his voice steady. "Yes, I will not apologize for protecting my company, but I will apologize for underestimating what this woman would become to me." He turned to Evelyn. "This began as an agreement, but she has shown me what strength and loyalty truly mean. If that costs me my title, then so be it." The room fell silent. For once, no one had a clever response. The chairman finally sighed. "The board will vote to reinstate you after this week's review. The company needs stability, and the public trusts you again." Outside the building, the afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Cameras flashed as they exited together, but this time, Alexander reached for Evelyn's hand in front of everyone. She squeezed it gently, her eyes glistening. Back at the mansion, the quiet felt different, lighter, freer. The storm had passed, and so had the fear that had once ruled their lives. That evening, Alexander invited her to the music room. The piano gleamed under the soft lamplight. He nodded toward the seat beside him. "Play with me," he said. She smiled. "I thought you preferred to play alone." "Not anymore." They played together, the melody slow and steady, rising with emotion that neither tried to hide. When the final note lingered in the air, he turned toward her. "I have one more thing to ask you." She laughed softly. "Please tell me it is not another contract." He smiled. "No contracts, no conditions. Just this." He reached into his pocket and placed a small velvet box on the piano. Inside was a new ring. Simple, elegant, and real. "Evelyn Hart Pierce," he said, his voice steady but full of feeling. "This time, no paper, no signatures, just my heart. Will you stay?" Her breath caught. "Yes," she whispered. "I already have." Outside, the city lights shimmered through the rain-streaked windows. For the first time, there were no cameras, no pretense, no performance. Just two people who had started as strangers in a deal and ended as something neither of them had expected: partners, equals, and, finally, home. As the music faded, Alexander's hand found hers, their fingers interlacing naturally. The past no longer mattered. The truth had been exposed, the lies washed away, and what remained was something simple and unbreakable. Love, real and unspoken, had found them where no one thought it could, inside a marriage that was never supposed to be real. Weeks passed, and the chaos that had once surrounded their names slowly faded. Reporters moved on to the next scandal. The headlines softened, and the world that had once doubted them began to forget. Inside the Pierce mansion, life returned to something quiet and beautifully ordinary. Evelyn woke each morning to the sound of birds outside the window, sunlight spilling across the sheets. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. Alexander had begun physical therapy again, this time not out of duty, but because he wanted to walk beside her someday. Every step was a battle, but he faced it with the same quiet strength that had defined him since the day they met. One morning, she found him in the garden, practicing with his cane. The breeze lifted his hair as he took slow, deliberate steps across the path. She watched from the doorway, pride swelling in her chest. He turned and smiled when he saw her. "You are awake early," he said. "I could not sleep," she replied. "You were not in bed." "I wanted to see if I could make it to the roses on my own," he said, glancing at the blooms swaying in the wind. They looked different in the morning light. She walked to him, taking his hand gently. "They look the same to me." He shook his head. "No, they do not. They look alive again." Evelyn laughed softly. "So do you." This leading the DAC to guard restful awards. Later that afternoon, they visited Street Francis Hospital together. Her mother was recovering well, sitting up and smiling brighter than Evelyn had seen in months. When the nurses whispered about the couple who had survived a public scandal and still looked inseparable, Evelyn only smiled. She no longer cared what people said. On the drive home, the city skyline shimmered against the evening sky. Alexander looked out the window for a moment before speaking. "You know," he said, "when this all began, I thought I was saving my company." Evelyn turned toward him. "And what do you think now?" He smiled faintly. "Now I know you saved me." Her heart tightened, and she reached for his hand. We saved each other. That night, the mansion felt warmer than it ever had. Dinner was simple: 2 glasses of wine, soft laughter, and music playing quietly in the background. Afterward, they walked together through the garden. The roses glowed faintly under the lights, the air cool and calm. Alexander stopped near the fountain, the same place where months earlier he had told her their marriage needed to look convincing. Now, he turned to her with the same steadiness but a different light in his eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "we never really had a proper wedding. No vows that were real. No promises that belonged to us." Evelyn smiled. "We do not need a ceremony to prove anything." "Maybe not," he said, "but I want to say this anyway." He took her hand and held it against his chest, where his heartbeat was slow but strong. "Evelyn Hart Pierce, I promise that from this day forward, I will never let anyone write our story for us again. I will love you without conditions, without contracts, without fear." Tears filled her eyes, but her smile never wavered. "And I promise to remind you every day that love was never your weakness, it was always your strength." He leaned closer, and for the first time, there were no walls between them. Just the sound of water and the soft whisper of their hearts finding peace. As the night deepened, the city lights shimmered far in the distance, reflecting on the surface of the fountain. The world outside would forget, as it always did, but the truth of what they had built would remain steady, quiet, and unbreakable. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "We made it, Alexander." He smiled, his hand tightening around hers. "Yes," he said, "and this time it is real." The wind rustled through the roses, carrying away the last traces of their old lives. What began as a contract had become something far more powerful, a love that no longer needed to be proven, only lived.